Hello, hello, everybody. Good morning. Good morning. Welcome to Brain Gains. Really excited for today's presentation. It's going to be a fun one.
I wouldn't go that far. It's going to be a fun one, huh? Already setting the bar too damn high.
Well, I've seen the slides, so I know.
Okay.
Okay, let's go ahead and share my screen here. And now it's time for today's Brain Gain. As I mentioned at the top of the call, we have Fred joining us. He's going to be talking about the best debugging tools. This call topic was actually requested on one of our recent live Q&A calls that we did for Google Analytics 4 course. And people just loved it because Fred is amazing. He's a co-instructor here at DDU, and it was really fun to see and dig deep into some of your favorite tools. So we thought we'd bring it to everyone to share. So for this call, we are going to, if you like, Fred, we can answer questions as we go. But if there's specific questions that you're hoping to troubleshoot together, we're going to hold those to the end. But if they're specific to Fred's presentation or a specific tool, definitely ask those and we can address those as we can in the presentation. Does that sound good, Fred?
Sounds great. Yep.
Awesome. I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to you.
Okay. And hopefully everybody is seeing my screen now. Is that a yes? Yes, good. Okay, so let me, I have three monitors. I'm trying to put everything around so that I can see everything and not lose everything. So let's get started. So the best debugging tools with Fred Pike. It would help if this would advance. Okay, so I kind of started this whole process of debugging and figuring this stuff out so you guys know my story a little bit. I started with a GA course from Jeff many years ago, which just kind of changed my life. Not kind of, it did change my life. And one of the subsequent courses I took was a GA intermediate class at CXL with Charles Farina. And you guys all know Charles Farina. He's brilliant. And one of probably the best thing I got out of that course was the way that you could actually kind of look behind the curtain of a website and see what was happening. So not only can you use this for debugging, but you can use it to, figure stuff out on your own and just see what other people are doing. So this section, what I'm going to talk about is really kind of peeking behind the curtain. And if you've heard me speak before, you know that I'm a dog lover and I almost always bring my dog into the presentation. So rather than peeking behind the curtain, we'll be Pekingese behind the curtain. I can hear all you groaning, but it's okay. I'm in charge here and I love my Pekingese Shusha. So we're going to be Pekingese behind the curtain here. Let me make sure I've got the chat up. Okay, so what we're going to cover today, how come this stops working? What we're going to cover today is the Dev Console, the Network tab, some key Chrome extensions, some other Chrome extensions, and then we're going to end up with 3 case studies of how you can use all these tools together to really figure out what's going on when something is not working, and in 3 common case studies. So, as I mentioned, this whole section is about debugging, but for me, it's really much more about education. And a lot of times I see people posting on Facebook or whatever, I just got Google certified, but I'm not working at an agency or a company. I don't know how to learn things. I don't know how to test things. And, the common advice is, well, set up your own website and examine that traffic. But that's really not great advice because, if you're just come out of school or whatever, you set up your own website, you're not going to get a lot of traffic to it, most likely. But these tools, for me, have been a real education because using them, I get to see what other companies are doing. And you can learn so much from just looking at how they've set up analytics, how they've set up GTM, how they've set up some of their other marketing snippets or whatever. And so I think almost more than debugging, this is an education tool. Yeah, it's great for debugging, but if you like this field, if you're intellectually curious about how people do things, how people track user interactions on the website, these tools are, I think, would really help teach you and educate you on what other people are doing. So let's start off with the Dev Council. And commonly called the Dev Council, it's really the Developers Council, I guess is the full name for it, or the Developers tool set or whatever. And what it does that I think is really unique is that it'll speak to you at the level of knowledge you have. There is a whole bunch of stuff in the Dev Council, and I don't understand all of it. I'm far from understanding all of it, but I know enough. And I mean, I started at one level and the Dev Council spoke to me. Then I learned more and the Dev Council is still feeding me information. I learned more, the Dev Council is still giving me more information. And last week I was banging my head against the wall with the problem I was having with the client. I thought it was a stop propagation issue in Google Tag Manager, which it actually wasn't. But I got one of our senior devs and we spent half an hour going through the website and going through the Dev Council, and I learned more stuff. I mean, a senior developer here at Northwoods knows way more than I do about, JavaScript and all that and everything that's really going on behind the Dev Council. But I learned from him, and that tool is still really helpful to me too. So I think it's unique in that it does speak at your knowledge level. So we'll start off with just some basic setup tips and tricks for the Dev Council, like how to open it, where to place it, how to preserve navigation, whether you want error messages or not, and how to clear entries. So let's go live with this. And what we're going to do is, oh, look at this. We have an example site with a picture of a dog on it. How amazing is that? So the way you call up the Developer Council, I'm sure most of you already know this, but let's just cover the basics. There are several different ways to do that. One way is just click on the three dots up here, go to More Tools, and then go to the Developer Tools here. Another way is you can do Control-Shift-I or the equivalent in the Mac world, or the way I typically do it on a PC is I press F12, and that calls up this whole section down here, which is the Developer Council. Now let's talk about the two types of people that exist in the world. There are the really smart people who put the Developer Council on the bottom of the screen. And then there's everybody else who puts them, for example, on the side of the screen, one side or the other. So you may recognize a tiny bit of bias in how I presented that, but I don't like it on the side, but I know a lot of people like it on the side. I like it on the bottom, like that, just because I can see more of the Dev Council, and usually I have enough space between the two of them. The other thing is if I'm in a multi-monitor environment, which I typically am, you can open it up in a separate window and then move this window to another monitor and expand it. So that's a nice thing too. But for our purposes here, we're just going to put it on the bottom. And I hope nobody, let's see. And there are those with open on a new monitor. Yep, there we go. You and I are on the same page, Jay. So there's a couple other things that I think are important to do. One is if you look at the council, which is where we're going to spend a fair amount of time, a lot of times a lot of stuff happens down here. So it's nice to just clear everything out and start from scratch. And in general, when you have a bunch of stuff being displayed, you can click on this thing that, I don't know why that means clear console, but it does. That circle with a slash through it is going to clear everything off the console. So now you can start from scratch. The other thing is that you often want to keep the information showing up in the console as you go from one page to another. So the way you do that is through this gear. And if you want to go down to the console section and make sure that you have preserve log upon navigation. That way, when you go from page to page, you won't lose all the activity that showed up in the log before, because often you will want to scroll up to what happened on a previous page. So that's an important thing to do. Another thing that I like to do, so let's close this. In the network tab, which is where we're going to look at next, you want to preserve log, which is what we just did for the console side. And you want to disable cache. You don't want to pull information from the browser cache. You want to have everything that you're doing here, testing, you want to have that go out to the website and then come back. And much of the time, when you first get into the network tab, you'll have this overview screen that kind of shows how events fall out over time. I don't find that useful for what I'm doing in my debugging and educating mode. So I typically will just turn that off and close that. And then I have more space down here for my network tab. So the main things I wanted to talk about is how to open it, where to place it, how to preserve navigation, and error messages is one more thing that I want to talk about in the console. You can get a lot of information showing up in the console, and sometimes it's too much. So by default, you get errors and warnings. So you get a lot of stuff showing up, which we'll see in just a little bit. But unless I have this on a separate monitor, I typically only go with the information, unless I'm really checking for errors. So that's how I set things up in general. Now, back to here for a second. So we've covered everything here. The network tab is where we're going to start off with. And it's a really powerful portion of the dev console, of the developers tools. And it is really the source of truth of everything that's happening on the browser side. All the traffic that's coming into the browser, all the traffic that's coming out of the browser is reflected in the network tab. And so we're going to go into here and we're going to look at how we can filter in the network tab, and we're going to learn how to identify GA4 hits, which we are primarily interested in. So let's go live again. I'm starting with this dog site because it's really simple. And in a little bit, we're going to go over to the GoPro site, which has way more stuff happening. But I wanted to start off simple so we could see things, and then we'll go into the some real websites. So we're going to go to the network tab, and I'm going to refresh the page, and now we'll get some information down here, hopefully. Yeah. So you can see it may have taken a little bit on your screens, but like, I don't know, 30 things all of a sudden appeared in the network tab. So everything that's happening on the browser, it's calling up CSS, it's calling up JavaScript, it's calling up the photo, which is great. And some of these things can be really relevant if you're like a front-end designer and you want to see what's happening with like how quickly that image is loading. But we're not front-end developers, or maybe we are, but today, right now, we're not. So what I want to do is look at just GA4 traffic, and we're going to do that with the filter. So everything that gets sent to analytics starts with a collect. And we can see that there is, in this example, there's a collect v = 2, which is GA4. So by definition, anything, well, actually not everything. Most things that are collect v = 2 are GA4 hits, v = 1 are UA hits, and we'll see those on the GoPro when we get to it a little bit. So we can filter fairly quickly here and look at just the GA4 hits that we're interested in. We can also filter on, the TID, the tracking ID. So this is my GA4 measurement ID. So I could filter on that. That would be another way to filter on just GA4 hits. And that could be very useful if you have more than one tracking ID on the site, which we'll see that GoPro does. Data-driven U does. Lots of sites have more than one GA4 measurement ID on there. The other thing you could do is, let's say I just want to look at page view events. And actually, let's put that collect back for a second. So let's look at what these two hits are that get sent to GA4. We know it's V2. It kind of says so right there. So when we look at actually, let's start from here. So the header gives us the whole information, where it's being sent to, googleanalytics.com. There's our collect. So we're beginning to look at the query parameters after collect. And the query parameters are what define where it's going and what type of event it is and all that stuff. If you look at the payload, it breaks it down a little bit better. We get rid of the first portion of the request URL where this is being sent. And we look at just the query string parameters, as it says. So we don't know what these things are necessarily, but many of you would know, for example, the TID is the tracking ID. And you can kind of guess at that too, because this looks like the measurement ID for a GA4 property. We also have the CID, which is the client ID. That's the cookie-based identifier for each combination of browser and device. So on this browser, on this device, I am this number. And then we have a lot of information down here, including EN, an event name. And as we know, everything in GA4 is an event. So we have a user engagement event. That's what shows up here. And let's see what our other one is. We have a page view event also. So there's not a lot being sent along with that page view. I'm not adding any extra parameters because you would see them down here, and we will see that in a little bit. But you can see that I had a page view that got sent over to analytics. We've got the document location, which is the full URL. We have the document referrer, which is the previous page that we were on. We have the document title, which is what's showing up here. So all that stuff is bundled up and sent over to Google Analytics. Perfect. We could also, if we were just actually, let's go around to some of this site. See if we can get some traffic going. So you can see some additional things show up here. And the most recent hit is always the one on the bottom. Let's also let's see if we get a scroll event. Scrolling down should give me a scroll event. And you can tell right here that it's a scroll event because the EN is equal to scroll. So let's say I had a bunch of GA4 activity going on and I only wanted to look at page views. I could also filter up here on EN equal page view. So how do I know that? I know that because I've looked at these hits before, and I know that the EN is page view, but it doesn't say page view. It doesn't say EN equal page view here, but if you look at the actual hit, it's going to say that someplace over here, DL, document title, right there, the very last thing, EN equal page view. So that's what I'm looking for. And once you get used to the nomenclature, how it's set up, it's really easy to find things. Okay, so that's great. It can get a little bit more complex. And let's just look at an example. Let's look at the GoPro one, just to begin to see some more things. So we're going to clear that, refresh. And so now we have a bunch of things happening here. Obviously a more complex site. We have collect V2, which is, as we know, GA4. We have collect V1, which is universal analytics. And so it just gets a little bit more complex. And as you look at this, I mean, yes, you can go into each activity and try to figure out, okay, what's happening here? Where are my page views? Where are my add to carts? All that stuff. So the network tab is great, but man, it is so detailed and it's so hard to look at everything. You really have to look at one event at a time. So as powerful as it is, there are some other things that we can do to give us the information in a slightly better format. So let's go back to our slides here. Make sure there's no message. Okay. So the network tab, again, is the source of truth. Now let's look at some key Chrome extensions that are going to help us interpret what's happening in the network tab. It's great, but it's hard to work with because you can get overwhelmed with everything that's showing up there, even though you can filter. So the Chrome extensions that we're going to talk about, and I say Chromium because it's not just Google Chrome, but any Chromium-based browser these extensions will work with, like Microsoft Edge, for example. So the Chromium extensions add a level of abstraction to that source of truth that's in the network tab. If you really wanted to always look at that actual source of truth, you would just work with the network tab, but the Chrome extensions make life much easier. So let's go live and look at some of those. There are two that I primarily use that we're going to talk about as our key Chrome extensions. And the first is the AdSwerve Data Layer Inspector. And this is the tool that Charles Farina introduced years ago in that GA intermediate class I took, which just was kind of amazing. And then we'll also look at the GA Debugger, which is a tool from data-driven use friend David Vallejo. So we're going to start with the Data Layer Inspector Plus. And if I open that up, there are many things that you can do with the Data Layer Inspector Plus, but what it's going to try to do is take that network tab information and put it in a format on the screen where you can read it more easily, and it's going to highlight all the GA events. I'm hesitating because it would do it for UA hits also, which aren't necessarily events. But it's going to highlight all the analytics events that show up, so you can tell at a glance that, I can see all these things that are yellow, those are related to analytics. Now, there's a lot you can do with the Data Layer Inspector. You could add other analytics too. So you could add Google Marketing, you could add the remarketing tags could show up as well. You could add Facebook, Telium, Adobe, a bunch of Segment, a bunch of things. So for right now, I'm just going to keep it simple and just have GA events show up. But there's a couple of things I do. One is I typically collapse a banner, which is this portion here, just because there's not a lot of space on the bottom of the DevTools. So I like to collapse that. And then I will also show the client ID next to, why am I not getting that? Oh, right there. Yeah, there's a CID, the client ID. So there is that, again, that unique identifier of this browser and device combination, i.e. a user. And I won't cover that now, but you can also use this to insert your own GTM container. So for example, if you were, and I think I pointed this out in a support call a little while ago, but I was working with a client and they had a GTM container on the site that we were going to be replacing. So I was working in the new GTM container and I was able to place that GTM container on their website in my session only, so I could test it before it went live. So that's a really cool part of the AdSwerve Data Layer Inspector Plus as well. Okay, so let's look at what type of information we get with the Data Layer Inspector Plus. And I'm going to do it in the context of how I often will do some auditing of an e-commerce site. So one of the things that I will do when I go to an e-commerce site is look at the products, for example. So on this site, we have two products. So what we're looking at here is a list of items, right? So there should be a view item list, and this is from the data layer, and responding to that, there should be a GA4 event of view item. Oops, help if that show it a little better. A view item list. Now this is interesting. You probably know that when GA4 it will batch events together. So in this event, we actually have the page view and we have the view item list, and there are two items on this list. So it's showing up right here what the two items are. And so I can see, based on the console and the Data Layer Inspector Plus, I can see that there is an event, the view item list event, and that resulted in a GA4 hit. Perfect. So that's good so far. Another thing that I will do when I'm auditing a site is check the 3 different places where you can typically add to cart. And the websites often fall apart in that add to cart transaction. They typically get one of the 3 right. Sometimes they get all 3 rights, but let's look at those 3 and see what's happening here. So on this list of items, I can add to cart directly here. So what happens down here? Look, in the data layer, we get an add to cart event. Now, hopefully, and you can see there's always that little pause before the GA4 event appears. We got the add to cart, and we were told this is the items array that's showing up here. So the item ID is 28, the item name is Chewy Toy, etc. So that showed up. Perfect. The other thing that I will check to get to one of the other add to cart options. So we're getting a couple of things here. We got a view item. So I clicked on that item, right, from the view item list. I clicked on that item and I get a view item, which is great. I want to do that. And now here's another add to cart, another place where I can add to the cart. And let's see what happens. We get the data layer add to cart. And again, in a batch event, we get an add to cart. Cool. So I've tested 2 of the 3. Whereas the third way, this is an area where a lot of places fall apart. I view the cart. Let's get down here. And here I can actually add to the cart, right? So let's add 2 to the cart. We were at 5. I'm up to 7, so I'm adding 2, right? Are you impressed with that math? I'm going to update the cart. And notice that nothing has happened down here yet. We don't have anything about add to cart, although we do have the view cart event, which is great. So now I'm going to update the cart. There's my add to cart. And we should get, there is another add to cart. And this time, let's see if it worked right. Look, the quantity is 2. So the quantity reported is not 7, which is the total number that's in the cart. The quantity reported is the delta, the 2 that I just added. So if I was auditing this site, I'd say, hey, nice job. You were able to add to the cart in the 3 different places where you typically do. You were able to add the addition in the add to cart. The delta, you recognize that as 2 rather than 7. The price appears to be right. So this looks good. And then if we proceed to checkout, we should have a begin checkout event, and there should be a GA4 event coming out here. Cool. There's our begin checkout event. Great. So that's working. That makes sense so far? I'm going to take that as a yes. Now let's look at another tool which will give us a slightly cleaner view of that same information. So I really like the Data Layer Inspector Plus. It puts everything there in the console, but the GA debug tool from David Vallejo gives us an even prettier look at that same data. So again, before we go to GoPro, let's look at it here. I'm going to go to Analytics Debugger. And David says that this debugger is a single source of truth. I love David. I would disagree with him on that statement because it's really the network tab, but that's okay. So one of the things I like about the tool, and that is also kind of annoying, is that it's not going to start tracking information until you tell it to start debugging. So you have to go in here and say start debugging, which we're going to do. And it's broken down into, we'll see in a second where you can add other things, but information related to GTM primarily and GTAG also, GA3 or GA4 information. And notice that GA3 is grayed out. I have no UA information on here. So let's go back to the shop. And let's look at how David presents this. David presents this. So here's, actually, let's add something to the cart. Let's add to the cart and we'll look at that. All right, so there is the add to cart event. And what happened on that event? a lot of stuff happens. So over here is David's interpretation of it, which I think is laid out really well and is great for e-commerce sites. Every time I'm auditing an e-commerce site, I use this tool. So here's the event, add to cart. We've got some generic information, the measurement ID. We don't have Google Signals enabled on this account. We've got some parameters of the value. There's no user properties. We'll see some examples in the GoPro where we do get user properties. And here's the items array that we just added to the cart. And then remember all those parameters we looked at in the network tab and with the data layer inspector plus, like the @v or the &v and the &tid. David shows them over here, but also spells them out over here, which is great. So if you're ever unsure, like what we were looking at UAMB, you may not have seen that before, but that was one of the things. That's user agent mobile. Great. I didn't know that, but here it is spelled out. So I really like that view that David adds as well. And then you always have the raw payload details. So this is the equivalent of what's showing up in the network tab. He takes us, he breaks it out into these different sections, server-side responses, if that's there, the e-commerce data, user properties. It's really a nice presentation, I think. So let's look at both of these in terms of a more complex site, the GoPro site. And let's refresh this. I'm going to see if I can actually cause an error on this site first of all before we look at some other items. So I'm going to scroll part of the way down to the 20% mark. We should get a GA4 event showing, and that's firing basically off this GTM scroll depth data layer push. And that should show scroll depth of 20%. Now, this is a more complex setup. We can tell at a glance that there's a level of sophistication behind the GTM setup on GoPro side that wasn't reflected on Fred's dog site. So how do I know that? I'm just looking at some of the event parameters, the EPs. Remember, EN is the name. The EPs are the parameters that define that event. So we have, is the client logged in? No, I'm not logged in. Client ID dimension. Interesting. So they are tracking the client ID, the CID up here. They are tracking that as a parameter. And the reason they're tracking that with an S in front of that is because when you export this GA4 hit to BigQuery, it's going to treat this client ID as an integer, and it's going to cut off after the fifth digit here. So the way people get around this, and this was in a Simo Hava post, which is how I learned about it, is that you add something to that to let BigQuery know it's actually not a number, it's a string basically. So this S, they're adding that onto it just so that they keep that full value of the client ID in BigQuery. Interesting. Okay, so that speaks to a level of sophistication. They have the GTM container ID. They are actually tracking the container ID that is firing this event, which is great. What I think is missing here is that they don't have the version number, which to me is way more important than the container ID, but it's okay. They don't have to be perfect. They also have the tag name. Cool. They're tracking the tag that actually fired this. So I can tell they're doing a fair amount of, there's some thinking behind this event. There's some sophistication here, which you would hope, right? And then they also have this EP event category action label. Why are they doing that? They're doing that most likely to keep some synchronicity with UA. So I'm sure they're tracking that as an event category action label in UA, and now they want to have some historical continuity between them. All right, so I don't know anything about GoPro, but I know already that they have a fairly sophisticated setup. Okay, so I was trying to get to an error. So now I'm going to scroll to the bottom really quickly. Okay. Now, we are going to get a GA4 batch event here. And notice that we had these data layer pushes, scroll depth, and those were at the 40 and 60%. And I can tell that, I mean, I can open it also, like it says 40 right there, but I can also tell based on the GA events that happened after them. And we have two more, I'm sure at the 80 and 100%. 80 and 100. Right. So we should have GA4 scroll events being sent to GA4 saying, hey, we got scrolled at basically the 20, 40, 60, 80, 100%, right? As a result of these scroll depths. Let's see if that actually happens. This is a batch event. We have a scroll. It scrolled at 60%, which is that first one. We have a shop with expert impression, which is something else that's happening over here. We have another scroll at 100%, and we have another scroll at 100%. Aha, we have an error here. And what's happening is that I scrolled so quickly that by the time the scroll event responded to this first scroll depth, which was 80%, the data layer had already been replaced with this value of 100%, and that's why we're getting 2 here. Kind of interesting, huh? Is that a bad thing? Not necessarily. It just means it's not 100% accurate, which we know is never going to be the case. But it's interesting that we can force the error. And is there anything we could do to fix that? I probably not. So it just is. All right, but let's look at an add to cart activity here. You can see there's a whole bunch of stuff happening here. We've got product impressions. I don't know what tag star is. We've got a whole bunch of batch events, internal link clicks, and we should have. Yeah, here's our view item list. This is a list of all the items that are showing on the screen. So all those things are there. Great. Now let's look at one of them. And do we get, there's a view item. I want to get to an add to cart. Who wants to buy a camera? Let's add this to the cart. Okay, so this is kind of interesting because I can guess that they don't have a standard GA4 e-commerce implementation set up. And the reason I can guess that is because if it was a standard, we would have an event of add _ to _ cart. So we have this product add data layer push, which is not a GA4 data layer push, but it has a lot of the same information. So again, without knowing anything about their setup, I know that they're doing some type of transformation to take this event, wherever this is coming from, this product add, and it's not a UA one either. They're using that to build this add to cart. So great, they're repurposing whatever system they're using to push that product add, they're repurposing that to track the add to cart. Great. Holy cow. I'm speaking way too much. So let's look at that same thing with the analytics debugger. I'm probably not going to go as deep into this as I'd like because I do want to hit those 3 case studies and I didn't realize that I was talking so much. All right, so let's add this to the cart again. And here's my add to cart. On this site, we do have, signals enabled. David is telling us that, which is great. Some other things, yeah, nothing else on here that's worth it. But we now have a nicer presentation of the parameters that we looked at on the data layer inspector side. The logged in, the client ID dimension, GTM container, all that stuff that we saw is broken out here, as is the e-commerce data, the shared parameters, i.e. everything that's in that batch hit shares a bunch of parameters, so they're all They're all V2, i.e. GA4. They're all going to the same tracking ID. They all have the same client ID, etc. So it's a nice breakdown here. And while we're here, let's just check one more time. Can I add to cart here? Let's see what they're doing with the view cart. Let's see what happens when we add. So they recognize that because the price changed. Let's see if we got that. We got an internal link click, shopping cart. I don't think, it doesn't look like we got that. Yeah, so they missed that one. Interesting. So sophisticated setup, but they're missing an example of an add to cart. And why do I focus so much on the add to cart? Because in GA4, that whole e-commerce customer journey is based on, session start, item viewed, add to cart, begin checkout, and purchase. I think those are the 5 ones. So add to cart is a really important thing in that standard report that we have in GA4. So I really kind of focus on add to cart to make sure that that is correct. All right, moving on. We need a second session of this, Fred. Oh, and I'm here all day, so I can keep going, but I won't. All right, so let's go back here for a second. What else do we want to talk about? So other Chrome extensions there's really virtually no limit to the number of other Chrome extensions that there are. So let's look at a couple that I like too in here. So Omnibug is a really interesting one in that it's not linked to just GA4. Let's go here to this guy. And by the way, at the end of the presentation, I've got a listing of all the Chrome extensions and a link to them if you want to add them. So let's clear this, and then let's just go to the GoPro site. And now we can see everything that's happening here. So we've got some UA hits. We've got some analytic GA4, Bing ads. We had some more stuff happening. Could have sworn. Earlier, or maybe it's because it's waiting for some stuff here. Let's see if that. We had TikTok, we had Twitter, we had a bunch of different tags firing. Yeah, something is holding us up here. We've got this waiting. There we go. So finally cleared. We have GTM, we have DoubleClick, we've got Bing ads, we've got TikTok, we've got Snapchat, we've got Facebook. We got it all here. And Omnibug pretty much grabs every marketing tag that seems to exist and will report on that. And with any one of them, you can, of course, click into it, look at a summary of it if you want, or look at the actual detail. So any marketing tag you're interested in is going to show up in Omnibug. So I like that quite a bit. Another thing that I sometimes use is the edit this cookie, which is a listing of all the first-party cookies on this site. And it's a really quick way to just clear your cookies instantly if you want to test, if you want to test a cookie consent module or something, you could clear them this way. So I like it for that. It does a whole lot more. It gives you lots of information, all the cookies here and what type of cookies they are. I'm not going to go into that now because a lot of this I couldn't explain it if my life depended on that, but it's a really nice one as well. So let's go to, and then the other one that I have up here, where is that? Omnibug. I don't see it. Oh, yeah, link redirect trace. So this is helpful occasionally when you're trying to figure out, all right, is a redirect happening here and what's happening with this page? So I went to this page, you can see it redirected here, and this page redirects here. I'm not sure why it's doing that. That's interesting. This looks weird. So the same page, https gopro.com enus shop, all right, that's redirecting to enus, and that is redirecting to the same thing. And then it finally shows up here. I'm not sure what's happening here, but it's a weird redirect. And sometimes if you're having issues with redirects, this will really help. Okay, I need to get to the case studies, which is the really fun part. Can we go an extra half hour, Kayla? Huh? Please. I'm kidding. All right, so we did that. 3 case studies. Here we go. So you may remember a while ago, the debug view in GA4 was broken. Every event was showing up twice. The page view showed up twice, user engagement showed up twice, click button, everything showed up twice. Now, how could you have figured out what was going on? How could you have figured out that there's actually a bug in GA4 debug, and it's not that your events are actually being duplicated? Let's look at some ways to do that. And so here are 3 case studies. We are going to use the Northwood site. So I'm going to preview this. And when I'm running into weird issues like that duplicate, those duplicate hits in GA4, here's the process that I kind of go through. And if this ever comes up, my machine has been downloading updates all morning. So that might be what we're seeing here. Let's just try that again. Yeah, things are really slow here. Can I answer any questions? Margot asked a good question about testing it on other tools. Yeah, you could. Actually, if we have time, let's get back to that. All right, so I'm going to connect to the site. Finally, it came up. And we will call up the developer console, F12. We'll go to console. All right. So here's the deal. When things are weird, I try to look at which system is corresponding with what other system. So if I go into analytics, I can see that I've got a GA4 page view happening here, right? If I look in my network tab, I'm going to have to refresh that. It'll show up. I'm getting a page view here. If I look in my tag assistant, I'm getting page views. If I look over in analytics and go into the debug view, I guess I've got to refresh here. All right, so we're going to get another page view here. We should have another page view in the console, which we do. We should have another page view in Tag Assistant. So those guys are all agreeing. In analytics, we have squat. We are still waiting. So that's interesting. If things are working well, all of those should be reporting the same information, right? We should have things in debug view. We should have things in the Tag Assistant. We should have things in the Dev Console, and we don't. We're missing one here. So what could be the issue there? The issue is that we are, actually, let's look at our network tab. We have a new parameter here that we haven't seen, and I'm sure you noticed it right away. The GCS, the Google Consent Status. So this is being set to G110. And what that means is that when I agreed to cookies, I turned off analytics. That's what the last 0 is. That this next one would be for advertising. So here in this instance, I'm allowing advertising, but I'm not allowing analytics. And what happens, you may think if you're using Google consent mode, that if you say no to analytics, the hit doesn't go to analytics, but it actually does. It just never shows up in the interface. It'll never show up in debug. It'll never show up in real time. It'll never show up in the data. It's used for modeling. And another way that I know that's happening is because each hit that is sent when you've got this G110, the 0 being analytics off, each hit that is sent, the client ID, that unique identifier that should identify this device in this browser, that changes. So look at that number. It ends in 274. In the prior one, it was 253. If we refresh again, we'll get a new page view here in a second. This time it's 405. So it's changing the client ID each time. And so that's a pretty good indicator that Google consent mode is on. So let's go to our cookies, our performance cookies. We're going to turn them on, confirm my choices. And now let's refresh. Now this time we have GCS, Google consent status of G111. So I should be getting a page, actually even better, I should get page views over here, and it finally worked. It's because Google consent mode was off. Interesting. So that has messed me up a couple of times. All right, let's look at one other example here. Let me move this off the screen to do a tiny bit of work here. Jeez. All right, so let's preview this again. We may not get to the third case study. I talk too much about dogs. Okay, so now let's see what is happening across the way. Let's hopefully get a page view here, which can take a little bit. Actually, let's start over here in our network tab. Refresh that. All right, so we have a page view happening in the console. We have no page views happening whatsoever. That's really interesting what's happening there. And now we have a page view in debug view. So that's interesting. Again, the things are out of sync. Debug view is showing traffic. Network tab is showing traffic. The console, and the tag assistant would be showing traffic also. That's coming through the configuration here. But the console is not. So what's happening here? I will kill the suspense and tell you right away. What's happening here is that this is a server-side GTM. So it's not going, the GTM version I'm using is going server-side, which means it's not going to show up in the console unless I tell Data Layer Inspector Plus, hey, I'm using server-side, and I'm going to do that through other analytics. GTM server-side, I'm going to specify where that's going. Now let's save and reload that page. And now we can see an SGTM, a server-side GTM event has happened. So if we clear this, refresh it, and Kayla, that might be it, huh? Shoot.
Yeah, I think we're just about at time. There's just so much that we could do and could be said about all of these tools and all the different unique ways that problem solving can happen when you're debugging. And thank you so much for putting this together. This was really super deep and very helpful.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Geez, it's
no, it's okay. It's okay. I do think that we should reserve the last handful of minutes for some questions that have come in. So Margot's question, is there a need or a value in using dev tools on different browsers? And if so, do you decide which ones to use based on % of traffic by browser?
So that is an excellent question. That's not something that I typically do. I will sometimes test things in Edge just because that is a Chromium browser and just gives me a different perspective. Most of the time, I'm just testing in Chrome. That it works so much better in the Google environment to just use Chrome. So I do 99% of my testing in Chrome. Probably 100% of my testing. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. And then Monique says, should quantity be in the items array or is the event parameter for the add to cart tag? I think that was in reference to your most recent example.
Yeah, quantity. The quantity is going to be the quantity that's related to that event. So when we added those two, whatever we added, the two dog toys, I think it was, the two is going to be the items array. The event quantity should show 7. I don't think I have that up anymore. But yeah, so in the items array, it should be what's specific to whatever that event is that you're adding or removing from cart or whatever.
Fantastic. Let's see. I think it would be great to show the slide with the recommended tools.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yep.
And I was able to drop the links in for AdSwerve and Analytics Debugger in there, but I'll go ahead and drop all these tools in.
So here's a Google consent thing that we talked about with the Google Client ID changing on each one. Here's a server-side GTM versus a regular client-side GTM hit. Here are the tools. We didn't get to Website Auditor either, but I actually thought I was going to run out of time. I mean, I thought I was not going to have enough stuff. And then finally, of course, thank you with my real Pekingese, the real Shusha, showing up.
We're just at time. And Fred, I want to say thank you so much for putting this together and your thoughtfulness. I know that our members at Data Driven always appreciate how grounded and like an education perspective that your presentations are. So thank you for that.
Sure. My pleasure.
I think you do a good job with lesson planning.
All right. Thanks. Right.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.